This is a video companion for my crochet basket out of scrap yarn project. This is a class that I've taught at the Yakima Makerspace, and I've made a little video to help my students just in case some of the steps get forgotten as soon as you get home. The first step is to choose a yarn or set of yarns, 3 of them, a light, a medium, and a dark, with one of those being variegated. Variegated comes tone on tone. You can have multicolored, and you can also have chromatic, where it does slow shifts from color to color. I prefer the multicolored most, but there's ones with slight patterns. I like to have a variety of colors in my multicolor. This particular one is called Earthy. There's another one that I like that is called Reef. And if you're working on something that's very rainbow colored with a wide variety of colors, you might choose something that's more brilliantly colored so that you can use up all of those wraps. You can also make your own variegated yarn by winding your own ball where you splice in different colors. Now, when I say scrap yarn, I mean little random balls of yarn. I like to make my own variegations sometimes because I will end up with birds' nests of odd colors, and I can make them into my own variegated yarn and use them in these baskets. I'm going to be using this tiny little ball, a spool of yellow that I wound myself out of some thrift store stuff, and another thrift store find of a multicolored yarn used for making scarves. So I'm going to match up all of the ends so that they all feed together. Try to get out any knots before you start. If you have a whole rat's nest, try to figure out how to undo that first. When you're pulling from a new skein or a new yarn ball, always pull from the center out. You kind of dig around with your finger until you find the little belly button, and you tease that out until you have the single piece of yarn. This helps your yarn ball not roll around, because if you're pulling from the outside, the friction is going to make it roll around and catch on other things. Alright, so you match up all 3 ends of your yarn, and this is what we're going to be working with. We're going to use a large hook, and we're going to be making these multicolored baskets. These 2 purple baskets actually use the same variegation, but I used a darker set and a lighter set to make it. So the choices that you make for your yarns does make a difference. I like using a dark, a medium, and a light, but sometimes I'll find that I have yarns that are different weights. I have in my hands right here a dark that is a thick weight and a light that is a very thin weight. So what I'll do with a thin one is I'll actually double it up. I'll wind my own yarn ball on a yarn winder and feed it out of the center, but I'll have it feed at the same time so it's doubled up so that a very thin layer can go with 2 medium or heavier weight yarns. And I like to have the contrast so that I can make sure that I have all the strings of yarn together all at once. You're needing to splice together the ends of the yarn. You're going to need to choose what you're going to replace the run out little scrap yarn with. And here's a neat little trick. What you're going to do is you're going to take one strand and you're going to splice it to the other. We're going to use just an overhand knot. It's the simple pretzel knot. You wrap it around and then tuck the tail through and then pull it. And then you take the tails of the new yarn that you're splicing to, wrap it around, tuck in a little pretzel knot, overhand knot, and then you tug it and you slide those knots right up next to each other. You can pinch and slide, or you can tug at both ends. And then you just snip off those tails, and this is very tight. It's not going to undo even after you snip it. I'm going to show that to you again. Here's another one. I have a yellow and an apricot, and I want to splice these together. One is my homemade variegated, and another is just a yellows that I've been using. So, overhand knot, over and through. Tighten it down. I'm going to use really tiny tails on this one. And then again, over and through. And I recommend this way of splicing more than any other kind of knot because it is extremely secure, and you can trim the little tails off so that the splice is virtually invisible in your final work. Tugs really nicely, doesn't come undone. One more time. Came to the end of that yellow. Now I'm splicing onto this green, over and under. Pull it tightly with that nice pretzel knot. And again, over and under. I'm leaving longer tails on this one so it's easier for you to see, but you could leave the tails on, and if they're long enough, you can hide them in the stitches. But if they're short, they'll kind of stick out like little scrub brush, so I like to trim them when possible, as close as I can to that tight little knot, without accidentally cutting the knot. If you accidentally cut the knot, then you just have to redo it. A little trim right there. There we go. Now, that's nice and secure. Okay, so I've chosen my 3. I've got high contrast between my yarns. I like having high contrast. We're doing another knot, which is a slip knot. It's the same overhand knot, but instead of pulling the tail all the way through, we only pull it through partly, and that means that we can tug on all the strands of the tail and it will slip to be tighter. I'll show that to you again. If I tug on the tail of a slip knot, all of them at once, it'll tighten that loop. And that's what we want. This is for the magic circle, which is the beginning of this bag. For those of you who like diagrams, here's a diagram of the overhand knot pretzel knot and a diagram of the slip knot. All right, to hold the yarn in our hands, we weave it back and forth between our fingers. I like this sort of Vulcan live long and prosper hold on the yarn to keep my tension nice and loose, just over the pinky, behind the ring finger, over the middle finger, and then back behind the index finger. I'm going to make sure that my loop is easily slidable and that the tails are out of my way. Now I'm going to grab my hook. We're using an N hook. That's a 10 millimeter hook. And the farther on the alphabet you get, the larger the hook is in crochet. Okay, so we're going to stab a crochet hook through the middle of the circle. We're going to grab the thread that's over our index finger. We're going to pull it through the loop. And we're going to go on the outside of the loop, grab, and then pull through what was on our hook. We're going to do that again. We're going to stab in through the loop, grab what's on our index finger, then grab what's next to our index finger and pull all the way through. And that would be our first stitch. But look, I messed up. I didn't go through my magic circle perfectly. So I'm just going to undo my stitches. It's very easy to undo stuff without losing everything in crochet. I'm going to start over, pinky, ring, middle finger over the index finger. Make sure I've got all 3 parts of my loop together this time. Make sure that my slip knot is smoothly sliding. I almost lost that green thread again. Okay, here we go. Stab through the loop, grab what's next to the pointer finger, pull it through, grab what's next to the pointer finger again, and pull through what's on the shaft of your hook. Stab in the middle, grab. On the outside, grab again, and pull through those two. That's the first stitch. Stab through the middle, grab over the hook, grab what's next to the index finger from the outside of the loop, and pull through. That's our second stitch. We're going to do this 8 times. Grab from the inside, grab from the outside, pull through 2. This is our third stitch. Stab through, grab, grab, pull through 2. Stab, grab, pull through 2. Stab, grab, pull through 2. Stab, grab, pull through 2. Now we're wanting to do this 8 times. And it's going to happen that you're so focused on stabbing and hooking and pulling through that you're going to lose count. But if you do, you can look for these little V-shaped parts. That's a stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that's our 8. And now I'm going to set this down, lay it nice and flat, no twists. And I'm going to grab the tails and I'm going to tug on that slip knot, and it's going to sloop, pull everything into a tight little donut. There we go. That's the magic circle. I like this at the center of things. This is 8 stitches all the way around. I even use it now for granny squares. This granny square doesn't have a magic circle, but I now use the magic circle for anything that I have doing a radial pattern. All right, pinky, ring, middle, index. Now, we're getting the tails out of the way again. We need to go and join up the end of our circle. So, underneath that very first stitch, we're going to pinch the donut with our middle finger and a thumb, and we're going to go underneath that first stitch right there. Hook, and then leave it nice and loose on your hook so that you can slide through. If you don't leave it loose enough, you won't be able to do it. That's stitch 1, stab in again to the very same spot. This is going to be our second stitch in the very same spot. Now we're going to move over to the next stitch from our original 8. We're going to stab in, grab once, grab, pull through. That's 1 stitch, stab, pull through, grab again. That's 2 stitches in the same spot. We're going to do that to every single one of these original 8. So we're going to end up with 16 stitches with 2 stitches for every single hole there at the top. Stab, pull, hook, pull. Stab to the same spot, pull, hook, pull. Move to the next stitch, stab, hook, pull through 2. Same spot, stab, hook, pull through 2. Look again, stab, pull, stab to the same spot, pull. Am I even on camera? There we go. If I tighten down too much, I won't be able to do this. So you need to keep your stitches loose. If your hands are cramping up, you're doing it too tightly. Big hooks and big fluffy yarns need you to relax, not tighten things down. Continuing to go around until we've got our second row all the way around. Okay, that's our first row, and then around for our second row, and now we're going to go around for a third row. Now this one, we're going to change things up a little bit. Right here where this V is, that's where we had 2 stitches, so we're going to do that again. 1 stab, stab in the same spot, hook again, and then with 2 in that one, the next one is only going to have 1 stitch in that next hole. At the next V, we're going to put 2 stitches in, and it's going to alternate 1 and 2. So that's 1 stitch, move on to the next one, put 2 in the same spot, right in that V. And then it's 1 stitch next, And then where the 2 stitches were, we're going to put 2 in the same spot. One and 2. Now, if you've worked with granny squares, you understand that this is an expansion stitch. Every time that you're putting 2 in the exact same spot, that's what would have been a corner on a granny square, but we've got 8 stitches and 8 sides. So we're actually building out something that looks more circular, but is actually an octagon. And I will draw a diagram and also write down a pattern. There was a stitch that got a little bit tight from the previous row, but I managed to get my hook in there. And hook through. All right, hook, pull, hook, pull through 2. Hook, pull through, stab, hook, pull through 2. Stab, hook, pull through 2. All right. Oh, I missed where I had to do double in one spot. There we go. 2 in the same spot. That's the nice thing about crochet is you can undo stuff without losing everything. You just lose a little bit of time. That's all. Stab, hook, grab, pull through 2, stab, hook, grab, pull through 2, stab, hook. 1, 2, 3, and now I'm on to the 4th row. So I've got it going on to the 4th row. Now, at each of those V's, I'm going to put 2 in those octagon corners. Missed a spot. There we go. And then it's going to be 2 single stitches, 2 in the corner, 2 singles, 2 in the corner, 2 singles, all the way around to the 8 sides. So if you're trying to find the spot, because the further out you get, the harder it gets. So to find the beginning of this row, I like to use one of these alligator clips. You can use a bread twisty tie and just put it in the center of that first V of the 4th row, where you've got 2 stitches starting it. You can use a bread clippy clip, one of those little plastic ones. The traditional way is to grab a contrasting piece of yarn, shove the loop through between the stitches, and then tuck the tails through the loop of that, and then that's a little flag for you to see. Again, I prefer the alligator clip because it's easy to remove, and I won't accidentally have a little eyelash sticking out. But as you get further and further out, it's going to be harder and harder to see where that next row starts. Like when you get about this big, we want to go about 8 rows out and then finish with a 9th row. Here's the diagram of what this looks like. So we're working with an octagon, which makes a circular sort of shape, like a stop sign. And it has 8 axes. Those are the corners of our octagon. So this diagram shows us our different rows. We've got row 1, row 2, 3, 4, 5, row 6, 7, and row 8. Okay. So in that magic circle, row 1 had 1 stitch, 1, 1, 1, 8 stitches around, so 1 stitch per side. Then, at each of the intersections of those stitches, we put 2 stitches in, and they made a sort of a V shape right there between each of those single stitches. And If you look at it, it means there's one stitch on one side of the corner and one stitch on the other side of the corner, which means there's 2 stitches for row 2. So 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 in each of those corners. All right, now we go down to row 3 and we've got 2 stitches in that corner, and then we put 1. So 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and then we go to row 4. And we put 2 there, and then we put 2 single stitches. Now if you look at this, row 1 has 1 stitch, 2 has 2, 3 has 2 plus 1 is 3, 4 has 2 plus 1 plus 1, which is 4, and that goes all the way around. Then it's 2, 1, 1, 1, which equals 5, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, which is 6, 2 plus 4 is 6, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2 plus 5 ones, and then it's 2 plus 6 ones to make our 8th row. So if I were writing this up as a pattern, I've got row 1 with 1 stitch 8 times. Row 2 is 2 stitches together 8 times. Row 3 is 2 stitches together and 1 next to it 8 times, and that 8 times is just going to continue for the rest of the pattern. Row 4 has 2 in the same spot and then 2 ones. Row 5 has 2 stitches together and 3 single stitches after that. Row 6, 2 stitches in the same spot, and then 4 single stitches. Row 7 has 2 together and 5 single stitches. Row 8 has 2 and 6 single stitches. Oh, I forgot the one there. There we go. So, row 8 is 2 together and 6 beyond that because it will total 8 stitches. In row 9, we're not going to do any expansion stitches. It's just going to be singles all the way around. It's going to be about 8 single stitches all the way around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. And that's going to be the end of our expansion. We're not going to be expanding anymore because then we're going to start building the sides of our basket. If you wanted to make this into a giant rug or something like that, you would just continue the expansion out so that you had 2 stitches at each of these corners, and it would just keep expanding out. So you can take a quick little pause, copy that down if you want. All right, so here we are with our octagon. This has the 9 rows. The 9th row isn't expanded, and that's why it's kind of starting to curl up. I now need to decide which side I like the look of better, the back side or what I have as the front side. I happen to like the look of the sort of V or heart shapes. Other people like the sort of knotted look that the reverse side of crochet has. I just prefer one over the other. It's all on your choice. Now what we're going to do is to kind of help with going vertically. As soon as I'm there in the corner, instead of going in between, I'm going to go around the shank. So I'm going to actually kind of weave my hook in there, grab, kind of have to, it's very tight, so I need to kind of help finesse my hook through there, and then pull through 2. I go in around the shank, pull, pull through 2. In and out around the shank, pull, pull through 2. In and out around the shank, grab, pull through 2. Now, do you have to do this? No, but I like this sort of rim that it gives the bottom, and it kind of helps the sides immediately start going upwards. Otherwise, you can have sort of a bulging bottom to your bag. That's not a bad thing, but this makes it more of a basket rather than just a bag. Stab, pull, pull through 2. Stab around the shank, pull, pull through 2. Stab around the shank, grab, pull, pull through 2. And you're just going to repeat this. This is the exact same stitch where you're grabbing and pulling through 2. And I'm off camera again. Okay. Around the shank, grab again, pull through 2. Around the shank, grab, pull through 2. Grab, pull through 2. Now, you could probably do the multiplication, but it's going to be a lot of stitches going all the way around. And that's why I like the 9th row to be just single stitches, so I'm not having to go around the shanks of some of those doubles. But this continues on all of the sides. Here we come to where I have a little bit of a splice, and I'm almost to the end of this rim at the bottom of my basket. Now again, you can skip this step if you want to and just continue with the single stitches, no 2 in the same spot anymore. That's just fine, but I really like the look of this edge. Okay. Finesse that through. Alright, so I've gone all the way out, all the way around. And now that I've met up with the bottom of my rim, I'm going to go back to right underneath that initial stitch. So instead of going at the shank, which would continue to curl this inwards and make it more of a, rimmed plate, I'm going to go up vertically. So I need to do just a regular standard stitch just underneath the top part of that. Well, I got one more shank to do. One more shank, and then I can do a regular stitch. If your stitches are too tight, this is going to be very hard to do. You need to relax. If you tighten things down, it's just going to make it harder on you, so you want to leave it kind of loose on your hook. Okay, now we go back to right underneath the top of the stitch, just like we did before when we were making the base. And then somebody says, well, how many times do I need to go around? Well, I'll put my bread clip on this part soon, but we're going to continue going around 3, 4, 5, all the way up, at least as tall as it is wide. So if we've got a radius of 8 rows, we need to go up 16. That's 8 and 8. So you're going to go up 8 and another 8. So that's 16 rows up. Yeah, it's going to take some time. But we're going to just keep spiraling all the way up. I'm putting my little clip on so that I know when I've gotten back to the beginning. Again, bread ties also work. We just go spiraling around and around, building up our basket. Okay, Okay, I finished my first row. Now that I've gone around once, I like to kind of keep count. Sometimes you'll have it perfectly mathematically come out. Sometimes you'll have added or lost a stitch. So I like to, at some point, count the stitches. So I'll put my bread clip on, our little alligator clip on, and then I'll count around to see how many stitches. I believe this bag has 60 stitches, which is not directly divisible by 8, but that's just the way this one came up. So here's a different one that I had started. This is the one that I started that magic circle with, and I'll show you the back side. At some point you're going to get tired of having this tail hanging out from the magic circle, and you might want to snip it off. Don't do that. Don't do that. That would be very bad, because then it could back out and then you'd have it raveling from the center. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to weave it back and forth around that center circle, kind of like a spiral. And I use my crochet hook. You could thread each piece of yarn into one of those large-eyed plastic needles and stitch it through the center of some of these stitches so it's completely hidden, but I find that just weaving it back and forth is good enough. Here, I'll get it more on camera so that you can see. I just do the whole shank thing, but I pull the whole tail through until I've gone all the way around and used up all of the yarn. Sometimes if my tails are short, it'll just go around the center. Sometimes my tails are a bit longer and I have to move on to row 2. I like hiding all of my tails on the inside of my baskets. Some people don't like any tails at all. I don't mind having a few little whiskers poking out, but if you really find them obnoxious, you can either stitch them in with one of those large-eyed sewing needles, or once you've woven them for quite a bit, you can trim them off. Just one more, and I think this one will be hidden enough. I'm just going to put it on the back side of this stitch to hold it down. There we go. That's good enough for me. Spiraling it around, and on the right side you can barely tell where it is. If you know what you're looking for, you can see it, but otherwise most people are not going to notice it. Plus, this is the bottom of a basket. Most people aren't going to be looking at the bottom of a basket. Now, when I started on this particular basket, I began with a homemade variegated yarn, a store-bought variegated yarn, and a yellow. When I had made that variegated, I didn't actually trim off all of the splices. I left the tails on. So I now need to hide a tail. If you end up having to hide a tail, there's a way of doing it. It's called floating the threads. You're going to lay that thread on top of the other stitches. Let me get it in frame. And you're just going to stitch around it, just keeping it laid on top of those other stitches. And that's one way of hiding the thread, is just keeping it there underneath your stitches. And that's another way of hiding the tails, is just floating them inside. You could have done that at the center with the tails from the magic circle, but you don't really have to. You can just weave those in. When you're using a variegated, you'll notice that the sides are going to have thinner stripes of color than the base does. That's just because the thread that's colored extends further when it's in the center, and then as it goes up the sides, you get thinner and thinner bands of color. Time has passed, and I've managed to do 8 rows. Every 4th row, I've added in a different band of a slightly darker color as a more of a visual cue, so that you can see where I'm at. And this is only halfway there. We need to keep going a bit further. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So one more set of 4 and I'll be ready to do my handles. Okay, time has passed in the blink of an eye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, we are ready for our handles. So I've been keeping my little bread clip right at where my row starts. And what I'm going to do is a chain stitch. So instead of stabbing it in to that stitch, I'm going to just grab and pull through. That's 1. I'm going to do this 8 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And now I'm going to count the stitches down below. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then on the 9th one, that's where I'm going to reattach this chain. I know it looks flimsy right now, but don't worry, because we're going to continue going around and we're going to beefy this up by going over the top with more stitches. So I continue to stitch around. Pretty sure I was off camera for some of that. Probably still off camera. It's a little bit hard as soon as this project gets bigger for me to keep it in screen and also do this at any sort of speed, but I'm trying to do that. And this being 60 stitches round at about 30 stitches is the halfway mark. So we already used up 8. I'm just kind of counting around until I get to the 30th stitch. So 8 plus the 22. I know, it's a math thing, but we're almost there. And then I'll show you the chain stitch a second time. This is what it's really like when you're not flashing through time at the blink of a video cut. All right. We're just about there. And now undo the chain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Count out the 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And on number 9 is where I'm going to reattach it. There we go. That's nicely on camera. And now we're just going to continue around. And then I'll show you when we finally get around to the handle again, how to make that nice and thick and stable with the handle. This is where you should listen to an audiobook or play some music while you're doing your crafts, because it takes time. Stab, grab, grab, pull through 2. Stab, grab, grab, pull through 2. And we're finally getting back over to our handle, which means what we have to do is we have to split the stitch. So we're going to go in through the upper half of that stitch, grab, pull through 2, and again stab through half, pull through 2, stab through half, This is a little bit finicky, so go ahead and use your thumb and middle finger to kind of smush the stitch so it's easier to find the right spot to stab. And there's going to be 8 stitches. There. And now we're back to the main body of the basket. So, if you check out this handle in a second, you'll see that it's gotten thicker just with that one row. Now, I like to have more than just one row. I like to beefy it up by 3 or 4. So, here we go on the other side, just to show you that again with a nice close-up. We do a regular stitch, the last one, and then we take that chain stitch and we go to the little heart-shaped stitch and split it in half. And stab at that spot and grab through. Split the stitch, stab, grab, pull through 2. Split the stitch, grab, grab again, pull through 2. Split the stitch, stab, grab, grab again, pull through 2. Split the stitch, grab, grab and pull through 2. Split the stitch, grab, pull, grab and pull through 2. Split the stitch, grab, grab and pull through 2. Split the stitch, grab, grab, pull through 2. And one more time, split the stitch, grab, grab, pull through 2. Now we're back to the base, so we go through both parts of the stitch. And there we go. And we continue this around. And now we don't need to worry about splitting any stitches. We're not going at the shank of any stitches. It's just the regular thing, 3 or maybe 4 more times up there. I think this bag will be good with 3 for making a nice cushy handle. So here I am on the second row around on a handle. And it's just regular stitches here on out. All 8. Going around. Hitting my camera with my hand. I think you can see the red blinking light of the camera reflecting off of the work. But you're just doing a regular stitch. And once I've got those handles made, and they're about 3 wide, I will stop. And then what I'll do is those tails that are hanging out there, I've snipped off my yarn balls. I've got these tails hanging out, so I'm going to hook and weave them back through, similar to what I did at the very beginning with the tails from the magic circle. I'm going to weave them back and forth until they're all tucked in. And that's the project of the crochet basket out of scrap yarn. I encourage you to use up all of those unidentified balls of yarn, all of those weirdo colors. In fact, specifically use colors you don't like, because having the variegated, having one color you like, one color you don't like, and then a variegated that maybe has something similar to both of those together, it will actually make it all blend, and you can use up some of those scraps that have just been sitting around waiting for you. Enjoy. I have been trying to start up a Patreon, but if the link below doesn't work for you, go ahead and subscribe and like and do all those things that make social media awesome. I've got a few other videos up, none of them craft related yet, but more crafts will be coming. Thank you so much.